Okay, my job is to make some comments about the appropriate workforce development that we need for this 21st century that we're in. And I want to argue, at the top it says real intelligence versus artificial intelligence. When you went to college in 1950 and all you got was artificial intelligence, that was okay. Now you have to graduate with real intelligence. That's my message across there. Computers will do the artificial intelligence. We had our transition, maybe it began in 1800 until 1950, from an agrarian to an industrial society, where we moved workers off the farms onto the factory floor. And at that time, the thing that the factory workers needed to do was to get to work on time and do what the boss said. And that's what we taught in our high schools. And in my high school, the boys who couldn't learn that were shipped off to the military, where they would certainly learn that they were going to get to work on time and do what the boss said. But now we're experiencing a new transition that began in, I think, 1950. I'll argue with it for that reason, and it's ongoing. We're moving from industrial to a post-industrial society, and I say from manufacturing to neurofactoring. Manu meaning hands and neuro meaning brain. I'm trying to introduce this word neurofactoring into the language, so please use it and, and show your intelligence, I guess. So here's the story of manufacturing jobs. The vertical scale represents thousands of workers. So we peaked at 19.5 million in 1979, and this fell down to a low of 11.5 million in 2010, and then it came back a little bit. I bring to your attention that China joined the WTO just before the beginning of a big collapse in manufacturing jobs. A lot of people think China did that, or at least contributed to it. You might want to think that the industrial age ended in 1970 or in 1975 when it peaked, but you have a totally different view if instead of looking at the absolute number, you look at the share of the workforce in manufacturing, which is this next slide. So this share peaked at around 31% in 1951. By the way, you can see the big bulge in manufacturing during World War II. And if you see it in 1953, that little bump up is the Korean War. And in 1966 and 67, you can see the Vietnam War, a little bump. But the story is down since 1951. 1950, it's been always down to now it's only 8.5%. So if you fold China into this story, meaning a lot of the decline in manufacturing was way prior to China. So this image creates a whole different attitude about the Chinese impact on our manufacturing, which is just continuing the trend downward that it had been doing for 40 years. This is value added. Up in the top is value added in what I call the man-to-man sectors, which are manufacturing, forestry, agriculture, transportation, and warehousing. That's all on the decline. Whereas down below, that's what I'm calling geek work or intellectual work. That's information, education, professional business services, finance, insurance, and real estate. That's where the jobs are moving into in this 21st century, intellectual services. So I'd like to think about being a professor. That's what Jerry used to look like here on the right. But take that 1800 professor and roll that person forward in time and ask what's different in 1970 compared to 1800. Well, there's in that office, there might be a IBM Selectric typewriter and a telephone, but the activity that the professor carried on was basically the same. We were talking and reading and communicating. The technology had not changed through that huge period of time. Manufacturing changed enormously, but intellectual services hardly any. But roll the clock to 2010 or 2020, time is spent sitting in front of a computer terminal. The activity is totally different. And incidentally, women are the professors now. That's the big two differences in the job market that I work in. Totally different kind of activity. Oh, that reminds me, aliens are taking the jobs of Americans. They work long hours without complaint. They do as they are told with perfect accuracy. They are okay with low pay. They don't care about working conditions. They aren't interested in joining unions. They don't fall in love. Who are they? It's the microprocessors. It's the computers and all the microprocessors and all the equipment that we're using. So I like to speak metaphorically. Is a personal computer like a forklift or like a microphone. The forklift stands for the equipment innovations in the industrial age. And it has a feature that no matter how strong you are compared to me, with a little bit of training, I can be just as strong as you, just as good at lifting equipment, lifting boxes with a forklift. And it makes us both extremely strong compared to what we do. So it eliminates talent or natural ability as a determinant of earnings. So it's egalitarian force. And it also raises productivity enormously. That's the story in the industrial age. And the microphone is totally different, because a talented individual with a microphone in 1800 might be able to serve an audience of a couple hundred people. But now that without the microphone, would just sing to a couple hundred people. But now that microphone allows the words to be recorded and transmitted all around the globe, so those entertainers have an enormous marketplace. That means that the talented people are going to command most of that marketplace. We can get enormous compensation, and the other people who are hoping to have one of those jobs are working as waiters in Los Angeles. So it's the opposite of an egalitarian innovation. It focuses on those who work hard but also have natural talent, and it leaves a vast number of other people behind. And I think a computer is a little bit of a forklift, because it helps people without talent to do things that they might not have done otherwise. But the big story is the microphone. It's changing the nature of the workplace, in which talent and hard work together drive the outcomes. And it's moving us politically into a very uncomfortable place, I would say. The story that we're having now in politics in the United States is really fundamentally this. We're not a manufacturing community anymore. We built the middle class in factories of America. We don't have them anymore. And we have this enormous inequality because of the technology that we're experiencing. So I like to think of task and compensation. They range from the mundane and codifiable. That's a reference to the fact that you can code a computer to carry out those, repetitive, to the creative and ambiguous. So computing a mean is pretty straightforward. Running a regression is quite simple. You move to the right is designing a persuasive graph and write a persuasive memo. And I thought I should add one more, which pick the variables in the regression. That's at the extreme right. It's the most difficult creative task. And the artificial intelligence that you're doing is not making wise choices of picking variables in that regression. You've got to be very careful in making actual decisions based on algorithms without a human knowledge and wisdom to have some input into it. But in terms of compensation, in 1960, it's true that the creative, ambiguous task had higher compensation. But because at this end, that's all being carried out by electronics, by microprocessors. And the result is that there's hardly any compensation here at the left, and where you're going to get rewarded is at the far right, where you're solving problems that require creativity and perseverance. Or you want to think about two worlds. There's Detroit, which is a top-down egalitarian community, a manufacturing community, and then we have the intellectual services in Hollywood, which is bottom-up, creative. The last thing you want in Hollywood is people to get to work on time and do what the boss says. You want them to be creative. And it's highly unequal kind of outcome. And I worry that that job market that we are well aware of in Hollywood is extending to all the intellectual services, including architecture, law, professional business services, etc. So there's two kinds of intelligence: artificial intelligence, that's carrying out somebody else's instructions. That's what we do in our classrooms. When I give a lecture and I test the students, that's equivalent to me coding a computer and making sure the computer is carrying out the code that I intended. That's artificial intelligence. Real intelligence is solving a problem that has not been solved before. That's learned not by lectures, but by experiences. You can see this up at the top. Training is what Pavlov does to his dogs. And what I do in a lecture, when I give a lecture and test to see if the students got the right answer, education comes from, in other words, getting the creative ability, that comes from experiences. At the right-hand side, you see the football players. The coach doesn't give a lecture about how to play football and then a test afterwards. Those boys are out there experiencing it. And the best coaches are the ones who design experiences They help them be better players when they get out there to try to compete with the other teams. That's what we need, not just in the athletic area, but here at the Anderson School and all around the university. We need to have more experience-based education that prepares the students for the reality of the new job market that we're all moving into. Or I like to think we should be grandmothers. So grandmother doesn't teach the child to walk. The child has that inherent in them. What the grandmother does is create a kind of a reasonably safe space. When a child falls down and hit their head, they don't give the grandmother a bad teaching evaluation. They get up and try again. And they believe in themselves, and grandma helps them believe in themselves. That's what education should be like, not the Pavlovian dog being trained for the 20th century. We we have to have grandmothers do the teaching rather than Pavlov. And then this is a little humor for you. My 12-year-old wants to know what career would prevent him from being replaced by a robot. I met your son. I'm pretty sure he could be replaced by hammer. This took an ugly turn. Maybe the robots will use him as furniture. And then this is the probability your job is going to be taken over by robots. I was very appalled by the fact that economists, 43%. But then I realized that we're more like clergy. We have a religion that we try to communicate to the students. So we're not going to be displaced so easily. Now I want to wrap this up with some facts to show you what's happening in the job market. This is based on what's known as American Community Survey, where they send individuals to people's households and they ask them questions about how much they earned last year, how many hours they worked, and what kind of jobs they had, et cetera, et cetera. We mined this data to compute a earnings effort curve. Effort is how many hours you work. And earnings are going to be increasing as you work more hours. So when I'm going to show you our regression coefficients, they're not direct evidence, but they're indirect filtered through the model that I created. So we're going to look at high school graduates. The horizontal axis is weekly hours. So you see 20, 25, 40, typically 40-hour week is very common, by the way, at every level of education. And then the vertical is a log scale. You take the difference in the log scale, that's approximately percent difference. So when it goes from 9.5 to 10, that's 0.5. That's about a 50% difference in earnings. So here's what it was in 1980. Longer hours, this is annual income, by the way. So obviously, if you're working more hours during the week, your annual income is going up. But it really flattens out. So those high school graduates who work long hours, they didn't make much more than the 40-hour-a-week person. That was 1980. Here we are in 2016. The panel this afternoon uses the word creative destruction. Every innovation comes with some new assets, but it destroys assets as well. Here you see the destruction of the high school degree because of the disappearance of manufacturing jobs and also because of the computer and artificial intelligence, where high school degree is really a bad problem. And it's a 50% reduction over here at the left. That's the difference between 10 and 9.5. But even at the far right, another thing is a steeper curve, so there's more pressure on you to work harder. If you're trying to maintain the living standards, it means you're going to have to work harder and harder. And what about a college degree? Here's a college degree. That's what it was like in 1980. And then this is where we are in 2016. So if those who work less than 40 hours a week, they're worse off. So there's a lot more, and it's a steeper curve. There's more pressure on you to exert more effort. And if you exert enough effort out to 60 hours a week, then you can actually do better than you had done back in 1980. I think the computer allows us to work more hours over the week, because my computer, when I wake up in the morning, it starts screaming, "Turn me on." And so I'm working at 6 a.m. every day, and then I don't close it off until 10. That computer has extended the work hours very significantly. So here's those with advanced degrees. This is what Jerry was suggesting. That's the 1980, and here we are in 2016. So for those with advanced degrees, if they were working at low levels of effort, they were about the same. But the real incentive is at the upper end, where you're working long hours. That's where the income inequality that we're experiencing is a combination of two things. And the devastating effects on high school graduates from loss of manufacturing jobs plus the artificial intelligence. And secondly, the big incentive to work long hours in order to make huge amounts of money for those who have the advanced degrees and presumably the talent as well. So to wrap this up, I'll tell you about my summers. There's a program that brings 100 Chinese students, recent graduates, to UCLA for the summer, and then they attach them to faculty who are called mentors. And most of these students are working in the biological sciences, physical sciences. They end up in laboratories. So they asked me to be a mentor for this one student, and I don't have a laboratory, but I said I will put her through the kind of experience which I think our students should have. And so I told her, and she was a graduate with statistics and finance as her background. So I said, how about working on this problem? How much do Chinese imports matter for U.S. manufacturing employment? Is it really true that the Chinese are devastating our manufacturing? And she totally bought into this idea of studying this. I didn't lecture her. I said, go out and read the books about these two theories, the Heckerling model and the Riccardian model, and come back next week, we'll talk about it. We spent an hour talking. I told her you can go to the Fred website and get data, how to organize it. And at the end, this is what she wrote. To me, this is the most significant document that I ever received. And she said, after the project results seminar, I went to Santa Monica with my friends to watch the sunset. At the dock, I met a father and son who were fishing. They only had one fishing rod. And to her surprise, it was not the father who was holding the fishing rod. I'm sorry, it was the normally it's the experienced father who manipulates a fishing rod, and the son helps to handle the bait or hold the bucket. That boy was holding and taking the fishing rod, and his father was aside offering the guidance. Most of the time, the father just stood quietly and enjoyed the sunset. I think that boy learned to harvest the best fish and now and in the future because he learned how to catch a fish by himself. And that's what she said. She saw me standing beside her in the summer, helping her to learn, but not taking control of the situation. On the other hand, the typical Anderson School faculty member teaches a course with 30 students in for 3 hours a week. So if those 3 hours are going to be devoted to students spending 1 hour each time, that's only 3 students. So you're going from 30 to 3. It's very labor intensive. It's 10 times the need for faculty hours if you adopt this style of training, but that's where it should go. We need real intelligence. If you're a student, you better make sure you're walking away from UCLA with real intelligence, which is an attitude, a creative ability, but also an attitude toward learning. And if you're a parent or a grandparent, you better watch over your kids and make sure that they're getting educational outcome that's suited to the 21st century. Thank you.